Now he knows China's still running their country the way they want to, but they're neighbors. So he's like, let me work with them. They're entitled to run the country however they want to. There's not as much brutal killing as they've seen in previous times, but I feel Russia in itself has tried to embrace democracy at different points in time, and they've been rejected. Even in 1991, which we covered regarding Russian Ukraine, that Russia tried to decide to ask to join NATO, and they got rejected.
History tells us that Berthier, the French general, entered Rome and took the Pope captive, and by decree of Napoleon declared that the Papal States had been dissolved and that a secular government was put in its place. So secularism overran or pushed him out of his position. And then secularism must rule for a while, and then the reverse will take place, and the king of the north will overrun the south, and eventually the synthesis will take place, and the south will be at his heels, and they will vent their fury on the Holy Covenant collectively. But we also saw that both parties are really controlled by the dragon power, and therefore both parties were actually also consulting each other, and much must have been happening behind closed doors as they discuss how to bring people to decide against the Holy Covenant. In 1798, Berthier made his entrance into Rome, abolished the papal government, and established a secular one, Encyclopedia Americana. So secularism, humanism, all of those isms which exclude God out of their political arenas take over. Now I'm fascinated by history. The one who actually did this was Napoleon. And just by a little quirk of, shall we say, divine intervention, he actually was also the literal king of the south, because he had conquered Egypt. He had entered into Egypt. And I'm fascinated to see that Freemasonry has something interesting to say about this, and so that we make sure we use the right sources, we use them. Freemasonry's web pages itself, the Grand Lodge of the British Columbia and Yukon, and they claim over here the evidence in favor of a Masonic initiation previous to Napoleon's assumption of the imperial title is overwhelming. The initiation took place in the body of an army Philadelphia lodge of the Ecosias, primitive rite of Narbonne, the third initiation of École Communique, being an advancement in the rate these initiations took place between 1795 and 1798. This is fascinating stuff. So in the years prior to this push, secret societies were being formed and gathered into their ranks those that would play the major parts in the final events. Because the battle is for your mind. And what they can achieve in secret can have an impact on the whole of humanity. So what happened once these secret societies had been formed, and who formed them? We will have to look into that. And we will see, and even in all the previous lectures that we have done on these topics, we have seen that organizations such as the Jesuits and others were deeply involved in the formation of secret societies and actually controlled them behind the scenes. So in actual fact, these kings, the king of the north and the king of the south, were sitting at the table behind the scenes. Now, Napoleon and Freemasonry, they say it was never, there's no absolute proof, but they claim that obviously he was. And what did he do? Always by their fruits you must judge them. August 15, 1769, this comes from the Freemasonry webpage as well. Napoleon Bonaparte in Corsica, trained in the military schools in Paris, was promoted to general after the siege of Toulon. He led the troops into most of Europe. And in 1798, Egypt. Isn't that beautiful? Returning to France, he was nominated first consul after the revolution of the 18th Brumaire. Napoleon founded the Bank of France. Now, I want you to take note of what is happening here. We're getting an entirely new political system in the world. One that moves the emphasis from the religious sphere to the secular sphere. And in the culminating years afterwards, secularism seems to rule and seems to have pushed the religious out of the way. And behind the scenes, things are happening. New structures are set in place. New organizations, new forms of government. And eventually the tables are reversed, and the King of the North overruns these mindsets because they have induced in the minds of men a longing for something higher. Very fascinating possibility. He founded the Bank of France, reformed the tax system, restored the church, no more dominance of one group of churches over another, improved the education system, and in 1804 assumed the hereditary title of Emperor of the French. The following year, he was at war with Russia, Austria, and England. In April 1814, he was forced to abdicate and exiled to Elba. He attempted to regain his empire in 1815, was defeated at Waterloo, and banished to St. Helena, and died 6 years later. Now, here are some of his fruits. Napoleon appointed his brothers to Masonic office. This is their webpage, it's not conjecture. This is not a conspiracy. This is fact. Louis was named Deputy Grand Master in 1805. Jerome was Grand Master of the Grand Orient, Westphalia. The eldest, Joseph, was made a Freemason at the Tuileries in April 1805 and appointed Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France. And Lucien was a member of the Grand Orient of France. And these were the ruling people of Europe. Now, if we go to the history books and we look at the International Napoleonic Society, we find something else that's very interesting. Napoleon and the Jews. Napoleon was the first leader in Europe to grant liberty, equality, and fraternity. And those same watchwords became the watchwords for another nation that would receive a gift from France, namely the Statue of Liberty, and would introduce those same systems of thinking and governance into its midst. And he gave this to all religions. And this lithograph here represents Napoleon granting liberty to the Jews. Napoleon's uncle, Cardinal Fesch, also got involved. He told Napoleon, "Sire, so you wish the end of the world to come with your laws to give the Jews equality like the Catholics? Do you not know that the Holy Scriptures predict that the end of the world will happen when the Jews will be recognized as a corporate nation?" Fascinating stuff. You see, up until that time, Protestantism had filled the world with the mindset that the papacy was the Antichrist. And now suddenly the Antichrist as a political entity disappears from the world scene, and his power, his political power, is removed from their sight. Where's he now? Isn't he going to bring about the final events? He dives underground. He doesn't disappear as a church, he remains a woman. But secret societies spring up everywhere. And these secret societies are founded by the very people that now have disappeared. And then they forbid people like Roman Catholics from joining some of the societies, like Freemasonry. And then when the objectives have been achieved, they unban the societies, as happened under John Paul II. This is interesting stuff, but here's a new worldview coming along. A new worldview. You see, the Jesuits had taught that the Antichrist was yet future, and that he would arise, and that he would intimidate the Jews, the church not being there anymore, but having been raptured. And all eyes, therefore, should await the coming of a Jewish kingdom so that the promised Antichrist could come. Now, the one who actually started this philosophy is Napoleon. At the time of the end, this philosophy, this secularization of the world, will push the king of the north out of the way. And then behind the scenes, things can happen, while to the minds of the people, they see something totally different. For religion, Napoleon ended the schism and restored the Catholic Church to France by the Concordat of 1801. So the Catholics couldn't have been that powerful. They were removed from power. Where's the Antichrist? He ensured freedom of religion and equality to the Protestant sects, and he declared France the homeland of the Jews. After it became obvious he could not establish their national home in Palestine, the code Napoleon established, equality before the law, emphasized the sanctity of the family and assured the legal gains of the revolution. The Code of Civil Procedures ensured widespread use of mediation in the courts and laws, and the courts were secularized. We move from religious dominance to secular dominance. Napoleon's religious opinions were the height of modern philosophy. This is what the Napoleonic Society writes. He was completely given to tolerance. Everywhere that Napoleon went, he led tolerance by the hand. Everywhere that he found several religions, he ended the domination by which one took precedence over the other. This sounds marvelous. Faith, Napoleon would say, is beyond the reach of the law. It is the most personal possession of man, and no one has the right to demand an account for it. Doesn't that sound marvelous? And people had been sick and tired of religious fervor, religious intervention, religious suppression, religious laws, and here comes freedom. Now, what if eventually you can lead this freedom into chaos so that people can ask for the pendulum to swing the other way? And now most people don't actually know about this. They continue to say, now here's an amazing incident which is not generally known. When the French troops were in Palestine and besieging the city of Acre, Napoleon had already prepared a proclamation making Palestine an independent Jewish state. It didn't exist. They were going to establish it. He was unable to realize this project because of the intervention of the British. This proclamation was printed and dated the 20th of April, 1799, but his unsuccessful attempt to capture Acre prevented it from being issued. The Jews had to wait more than 150 years before their state was proclaimed. The proclamation, however, did bear fruit. It was a precursor to Zionism, heightening awareness of the cause of the Jewish statehood. The ideas Napoleon expressed found the admiration of many who saw Napoleon's gestures as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, which foretells of the restoration of the Jews to their land. The idea drew many adherents, especially in England. Here is a seed a new philosophy being planted in the minds of men. There will be a Jewish state. The preparation for such a state must have been phenomenal. Just imagine. The Jewish people scattered throughout the entire world. Nothing but chaos here in the Middle East. And now a state is to be proclaimed. How are you going to achieve it that all the Jews that are ensconced in the various societies and normally quite affluent and good at what they are doing, how are you going to get them to budge and move there so that this can be fulfilled? That must take some effort. Not only that, if this happens, and eventually a temple can be built there, and a new philosophy, which is a Jesuit philosophy, of the Antichrist who will come, Alcázar, Ribera, futuristic Jesuit philosophies, well, then you have a new Antichrist as well, and the world can look at political events unfolding, and the question of where you stand with God doesn't come close to you. It's something that happens on the world arena and doesn't affect you. Here's a totally new theology. And it comes when? What is the date? 1798. A new philosophy. Now, I just want to ask you, what does the world believe today? Do they believe what the reformers believed regarding the Antichrist? That it was the papacy? And that it would set itself up as a God in God's church, change times and laws, and make null and void the precepts of God? That's what they believed? Or is it going to be someone who will come in the future and attack a new state that had to be created? Well, this is what the world believes today. So this has been very successful. 118 years later, the British would issue the Balfour Declaration, which called for a Jewish homeland. And ultimately, 31 years later, in 1948, Israel would be recognized as a sovereign state by popular vote in the United Nations General Assembly. Perhaps it can be said that Napoleon's premature announcement on that first day of Passover in 1799 played an important role in the creation of the State of Israel. On the 16th of August, 1800, Napoleon declared, "If I governed a nation of Jews, I should re-establish the Temple of Solomon." This is fascinating. Revelation chapter 11. Now, I'm not going to deal with Revelation chapter 11 because we've done it already in a previous series, in the Total Onslaught series, where we spoke about secret societies and how they arose out of the turmoils of the French upheavals and finally the French Revolution. We're not going to repeat that. Napoleon and Islamic Masonry. This is very interesting. Freemasonry appeared in Egypt soon after Napoleon's conquest in 1798, when General Kleber, a French Mason and top commander in Napoleon's armies, established the Lodge of Isis. So secret societies are now being formed in these secularized nations that adopt the new philosophy. Nowhere more so than even in the United States of America. Washington was a Mason. All the great buildings that point to the seat of government lie on Masonic stones. This is history. This is not conjecture. French Masonry dominated Egypt until British lodges began to appear after the British occupation in 1882. So there are secret societies formed within these countries in Islamic Masonry. Freemasonry was very popular in the first half of the 20th century, and many important Egyptians were Masons, along with British rulers and aristocrats who occupied the country. In fact, the Egyptian monarchs, from Khedive, Ismail to King Faoud, were made honorary Grand Masters at the start of their reigns. So the Islamic world is actually ruled in this history by Masonic individuals. From 1940 to 1957, there were close to 70 Masonic lodges chartered throughout Egypt. At one time, the leaders of the nationalist and Wafd parties were Freemasons, and many members of the Egyptian parliament were Masons as well, where they mingled with the military commanders and the aristocrats of the ruling British occupation. So it was really ruling behind the scenes. Verse 7, Revelation 11, and when they have finished their testimony, this is the biblical word, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. So secularism will be instrumental in trying to make null and void God's word. And all the isms arise in this time period. Evolutionism, spiritism, they all arise then. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. Spiritually, not literally, spiritually. So this is a mindset. A secular mindset. I ask you a question. Do we see it today in the world? What do we see? Do we see systems of government which are God-based, or do we see humanistic systems of government? When we look at our school systems, do we see God-centered education, or do we see evolutionism? Secularism is ruling the world. But secularism is leading to the collapse of morality. And once it gets to that point, then the king of the north philosophy will have the power to overrun it and grab the minds and hearts of the people while they are being duped and deceived into looking outside of themselves for the fulfillment of prophecies. Now, here are the temples. This is the first temple, what it looked like. And that's the model of the second temple, that it looked like. And are they preparing for the third temple? Yes, they certainly are. Here is the menorah, ready for the third temple. We have moved away from Protestantism, and we have accepted Jesuitism. Now let's get back to the Napoleonic Society and see what happened further. Napoleon established both the Bank of France, we saw that, the French Bourse, the stock exchange, as well as the National Department of Tax Boards. Do we have all of those systems of governments in the world today, yes or no? Yes, we do. And we have the same system of economics today, yes or no? Yes. The world is run by the stock exchange. To ensure equitable taxation for all, consequently, the income of the French peasants skyrocketed. Think tanks and research centers were established in France to work on projects vital for national economy. So a totally new economic order evolved. Who started these organizations? We will have to see. Who runs the secret societies today and the secret organizations? Who started them? Who is the instigator? Who's the boss behind the scenes? We will have to see. And maybe we'll get a different picture of what's happening in the world. An industrial board was organized to provide data and information to French industry, as exemplified by the success of the sugar beet farming and the canning industry. In the military, Napoleon pioneered in what we describe today as the principles of war. And did you know that these principles, the armies of today, are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his Grand Army, and it has been used ever since. Who controls these armies? Who controls the war machines of the world? Who controls the gun running? These are important questions. And now it gets interesting. Napoleon disappears. He says, I want a Jewish state. I want to rebuild the Jewish temple. What is he planting in the minds? An idea. He starts the lodges. The British lodges start taking over these lodges eventually. Of course, they're all integrated. And then Prussia, when Napoleon is gone, retracted the liberal laws in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The worst setback was inflicted upon the Jews of the Papal States. It would almost seem as if Pius VII had taken revenge on the Jewish population of his territory for the humiliation he had suffered at the hand of Napoleon. He was not content with their confinement behind the walls of the re-erected ghetto, but he obliged the Jews to wear the yellow badge. The Jews had to walk with a badge, with an armband. Does that ring a bell somewhere? In Sardinia, the Jews were thrown back into ghettos and not allowed to build synagogues. Much later, some European nations assimilated the Jews between 1824 and 1867, in Holland in 1830. These are Protestant nations. They don't understand what's going on. They're trying to help the Jews. Sweden, 1834, Switzerland, 1838. It is remarkable that in England, it was only in 1858, after Lord Lionel Rothschild was elected 5 times, that he was permitted to take his seat in Parliament. It is also interesting to know that the laws that were passed in France in 1808 are still in existence even to this day. So there was liberty on the one hand, but oppression started to take over in Europe. And by the time we get to Adolf Hitler, did he introduce the same oppression, yes or no? Yes, he hounded them. He disenfranchised them. And the Russians, all of these nations, suddenly the world was in turmoil, in war, and the Jews were the hounded ones. And at the end of this war, where would those poor Jews go when they tried to escape the turmoil of Europe? Where did they go? They were herded like sheep to a new Jewish state in order to create a new philosophy which was to be swallowed hook, line, and sinker by a world with a totally new religious philosophy, no longer based on Protestantism, but now based on New Catholic counter-theology. Have you ever thought about it? That the British, who were the saviors of Europe, allowed ships to be filled with Jewish hopefuls who wanted to emigrate to the West, how they wouldn't let those ships pass by, and how eventually they were all herded towards Palestine, and the Jews had to settle in a land that had nothing. Well, it's interesting. You have to create a national identity. You have to create national heroes. And we dealt with that in previous lectures. I don't want to go into it. And eventually, where did they end up? They ended up the leaders of the nations. And a new nationality arose, and a new nationalistic, Zionistic pride arose, and a nation arose. I feel sorry for them. And this man was the lackey of his Pope. And I'm not going to deal with that. And this man was maybe the same lackey, sitting at the table, behind the scenes.
Buzzing, radars is buzzing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Now, if we look at dispensationalist teaching, let's have a look what they teach. Christians have an interest in Jerusalem and Israel. This is dispensationalism. This is what the world believes today. This is what the evangelical world preaches. This is what the Pentecostal world embraces. This is the power machine of modern prophetic Christian interpretation. It is as far removed from Protestantism as the East is from the West. It is a capitulation to Jesuitism. Perhaps one of the most significant signs they look for is the reconstruction of the Holy Temple on Mount Moriah, the third temple, and the reinstituting of Old Testament sacrifices. If I reinstitute the sacrifices, what am I saying? Am I not saying that Christ's sacrifice is null and void, that it didn't fulfill the type? Isn't he the Passover lamb? This would be followed prophetically by the appearance of the man of sin, the Antichrist, in the temple to shut it all down. And they all believe this today. This is not what the Bible taught. This is not what Protestantism taught. To call an end to prayers and sacrifices. This is called the abomination that makes desolate, or the abomination of desolation, Daniel 9:27. This is what they believe. This is a totally new theology. And in order to get people to believe this, you have to be prepared to dislocate millions of people and herd them to Palestine to create a nation that can fulfill the prophecy. But in order to do it, you must control all the powers that are role players in the game. Does that make sense? And that's where the secret societies come in, that were all set up during this time. Well, is this a reality? Are they really doing it? Yes, they are. You can look at the web pages. It's fascinating. The third temple, Gershon Solomon, chairman of the temple, Mount Faithful, the preeminent organization in Israel working for the rebuilding of the third temple, opined on the record saying that a Netanyahu government, do we have one now? We happen to have one. Would be good news for the prospect of the rebuilding of the temple. In previous political campaigns, Netanyahu incorporated into the platform of his Likud party that if he was elected prime minister, he would press for the opening of the Temple Mount for Jewish worship. And they claim that the Temple Mount Faithful have the cornerstone ready to lay. In addition, the Temple Institute now has all the furniture and priestly garments ready for the third temple. The priesthood and the Sanhedrin have been revived. We're ready. And the world cannot wait for this event. And once this happened, Christians will be raptured. There's no such thing in the Bible. This is a new theology. This is a Roman Catholic conceived theology, and we'll be dealing with it in great detail in future lectures to show that it's not biblical, and yet the whole world believes it. Well, I was on the Temple Mount the other day, not so long ago, and there, of course, stands the Dome of the Rock. And today, there is great conjecture. As I walked there, we were speaking a wonderful language called Afrikaans. And these three gentlemen were so excited. They greeted us in that language. They came from South Africa. They were such nice people. They were so friendly. Look at them laughing. We sat down, we had a good chat to them and a good laugh. I have sympathy for the Muslim world. I have great sympathy for the Muslim world. And we'll be dealing with some of those issues, and some of the things we will be talking about are quite sensitive. And at the moment, they pointed me there to these trees on the Temple Mount that were dying. The tops were dying. And they said to me, these tops are dying because the Jews are excavating under the Temple Mount, and many of the water sources of these trees have been cut off. In fact, they fear that the very foundations of the Dome of the Rock are in jeopardy. Imagine if that building just one day disappears into some cavern underneath. What chaos will we have? But they claim they want to build the temple. Now, I want to discuss a little bit of sensitive history. And if I go to sensitive history, well, then I must quote sources that say it rather than that I say it. This is a fascinating book, and the web pages are there. You can check it out. Facts are facts. This is a book that was written by a Jewish man. And he confronted the thinking of many of the high-placed individuals of the world. This is interesting stuff. In this book, Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man, writes about the Jews and reveals an interesting history. He states that the present Jews in Palestine are not the true descendants of the Judeans, but rather descendants of the Khazars. In the letter addressed to D. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, a convert to Catholicism, the author, Benjamin Friedman of New York City, dated October 1954, provides some fascinating insights. This is in the public domain. Let's study this for a while and see where we get. Benjamin H. Friedman claims that the word Jew was only introduced into the English language in the 18th century, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodeorum, which means Jesus of Nazareth, ruler of the Judeans. Now this is fascinating. I went and checked it, and it is so. Yes, it happens to be so. Now the word Jew today has a religious as well as a political connotation. You think of a Jewish entity, a government, but you also think of their religion incorporated at the same time, whereas the term Judean is a geographic connotation. It's a geographic. It doesn't incorporate the religion. It's where he came from. He was from Judah. He was a Judean. He further writes, the form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all rolled into one, of those who practiced Pharisaism. The Talmud today occupies the same relative position with respect to those who profess Judaism. So the rituals and rites that many of them observed were based on the Talmud and not on the Torah. Rabbi Morris, this is all from the source. Rabbi Morris in Kurtzer wrote a most revealing and comprehensive article with the title, What is a Jew?, which was published as a feature article in Look magazine in June 17, 1952 issue. In that article, Rabbi Morris Kurtzer evaluated the significance of the Talmud to Judaism today. In that illuminating treatise and that important subject, by the most qualified authority at the time, Rabbi Morris N. Kurtzer stated, the Talmud consists of 63 books of legal, ethical, and historical writings of the ancient rabbis. It was edited 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus. It is a compendium of law and lore. It is the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, and it is, note, the textbook used in the training of rabbis. So rabbis are trained according to the Talmud. And the Talmud has very little in common with the Bible. Then he states, from the birth of Jesus until this day, there have never been recorded more vicious and vile, libelous blasphemies of Jesus or Christians and the Christian faith by anyone, anywhere, or any time than you will find between the covers of the infamous 63 books, which are the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law as well as the textbook used in the training of rabbis. I don't want to go into it. If I were to put the quotes on the screen, which the Talmud contains about Jesus, you would be horrified. It is some of the vilest statements that I have ever had the dishonor of reading. And this is what their training consists of. He then proceeds to quote some of the most horrendous statements from the Talmud regarding ethical issues, and not only regarding ethical issues, which deal with many, many issues from economics to relations with women, etc., and, of course, the view on Christ. As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who are they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history throughout the world, the origin and the history of Khazars and the Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it. This was the Khazar kingdom. Here is the Black Sea, the Byzantine Empire. Here was Persia. And here was the kingdom of the Khazars. It was a massive kingdom. Now let's look at some of this interesting history. The Khazars were an Asiatic nation. And the Jewish Encyclopedia states Persian origin that converted to Talmudic Judaism. Now, obviously, some of the rabbis involved there could have been Judeans and probably were Judean descendants, but their converts are not Judeans. And that had conquered a vast area of Eastern Europe, which was in turn later conquered by the Russians in the 10th and 13th century. So that is why there are so many Russian Jews. Have you ever thought where they came from? Did they escape from Palestine? Were they the lost 10 tribes? Did they emigrate to Russia? No. This is a totally different nation that accepted Talmudic Judaism. He writes, after a historic session with representatives of the three monotheistic religions, King Bulan, 7th century, decided against Christian and Islam, because Islam had just arisen, and selected as the future state religion the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and not known and practiced as Judaism, which was totally different, which was based on the Bible. They adopted the Hebrew alphabet, and the Khazars adapted words to their requirements from the German, the Slavonic, and the Baltic languages. This language was known as Yiddish. And Yiddish used the Hebrew alphabetic characters, but not Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I've always wondered, when I hear them speaking Yiddish, I understand quite a few words. Why? Because I'm German. They had many exchanges with universities and their students were trained. So here is another nation which had occupied this area, and they had adopted this religion and brought rabbis in and trained the people, but they were not Judean. Now let's jump to today in accordance to this history. The religion of the modern state of Israel is based on Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions and is far removed from the biblical worship of Yahweh. And if it is based on the Talmud, it is so anti-Jesus Christ that it belies understanding. And here we have, in March 2006, while visiting Yeshiva University at Brooklyn, New York, a Jewish institute dedicated to the study of the what? Talmud. We have Cardinal Kasper. Who's Cardinal Kasper? Cardinal Kasper is the cardinal associated with ecumenism. They are honoring the Talmud together. You see, behind the scenes, there is a pact. Because I, as a Christian, can sympathize with every other religion, but I cannot embrace a religion that speaks evil of Jesus Christ. Nor can I have a union with such a religion. Because can two walk together lest they be agreed?
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.